Welcome, Joyce Nelson with the Legendary Ladies.
Good evening. How are you all?
Good.
We want to do a special thank you to Midori Clark and to Sarah Schwartz, who made this program possible. Like she said, we were due to be here on March 14th. Now, with most of you are Puebloans, is that right? Or you didn't have it like it happened a little bit further north. So that interstate was shut down, 20, I don't know how many cars, lots of cars were stuck. So we're glad that we weren't stuck, and we're so glad to be here with you today. So thank you for coming. You only need to look at the clothing of those you will meet today to understand the vast variety of women who traveled to, influenced, or were born in the West. But when looking through history books, like this one from 1908, they were rarely mentioned. While some came west with husbands or fathers eager for the opportunities of land and gold, most of these women came west because they wanted to be here and for their own reasons. As a result, they were considered outside the norm for women of their day. But they all faced distinct challenges because of their gender as women and because of the paths they chose. We've brought together some of these unconventional women to share their stories with you. Our first guest was the first woman inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame, Alice Ramsey. Mike, how long have you been driving?
I've been driving since the first Model T hit the road, and at age 22, I made automotive history. The first woman to drive all the way across the United States, wearing this outfit and driving the latest model Maxwell touring car with a right-hand drive, turn crank starter, top speed 40 miles an hour. I'm Alice Ramsey, and on June 9th, 1909, I left New York City, headed for San Francisco. The Maxwell Motor Company was sponsoring the trip. They called it From Hellgate to Golden Gate, a publicity stunt to prove a woman can go anywhere in her Maxwell. Back then, many believed women were too fragile to drive or even ride in automobiles. Not me. I fell in love with motoring the year before when my husband John bought me a two-seater roadster. That summer, I drove thousands of miles exploring New Jersey with my friends. After I won this bronze medal at an endurance run, Maxwell's publicity manager approached me. My, you're the best woman driver I've ever seen. And he proposed this venture. Well, a man had done it, so why not a woman? My crew would include John's proper older sisters, Nettie and Maggie, and my teenage friend Hermione. Now, I was the only driver and my own mechanic. So while the others finagled a way to pack their big flowery hats, I was much more concerned with patches, inner tubes, and chains for the smooth canvas tires. And even with the big folding top up, we always wore ponchos or dusters to keep out the dirt and the rain. The company hired Mr. J.D. Murphy to travel ahead by train and keep track of us. He arranged lodging, publicity, and recruited local drivers to lead us through all the uncharted territory. Remember, we were traveling with very few roads, no maps, no road signs, and often no idea where we were. When in doubt, I followed the telegraph wires. They always led to a house or a town. And Nettie, my navigator, brought along the AAA guidebook, but it led to situations like this one outside Cleveland. She read, at 11.6 miles, turn right at the yellow house and barn. No yellow buildings in sight, so I drove on down the road and saw a woman in her garden. Excuse me, where's the road to Cleveland? Ladies, turn around and go back to those green buildings. The man who lives there is against automobiles, so he painted his house and barn green to confuse drivers. At another crossroads, a woman was waiting for us in her wagon. Yoo-hoo! Are you those ladies driving from New York to San Francisco? I read about your trip and I just had to see you. And in Chicago, well, an eager crowd greeted us at our downtown hotel. And there, the Maxwell people supplied us with block and tackle and a stout towing rope, saying, "You're gonna need these from now on." Sure enough, Iowa was a basin of mud and rain. I was concentrating so hard to keep the Maxwell on the road that we ran out of gas. There were no filling stations. Now, it took half a day just to find someone to bring us fuel. Next thing we knew, the radiator boiled dry. Now, rainwater was everywhere, but we had no containers to carry it. Nettie and Maggie solved the problem. They emptied their small cut glass cosmetic holders, and they filled the tank with ditch water, ounce by ounce. Repeating, well, Operation Cut Glass, twice more before we reached the next village. Now, with all this terrible mud and muck, the trusty 30 horsepower engine often stalled and real horses had to come to the rescue. One time I paid a young man with a horse to pull me out of a huge mud hole. He then walked ahead to the next hole, waited, and charged me double. Most of the time, someone was traveling with us, but one evening we found ourselves alone in front of an overflowing creek and had to sleep in the Maxwell. My feet on the dash, the steering wheel poking my stomach. In the morning, the water was down, thank goodness, and we quickly packed up and slithered through the creek into more rain. Oh, would it ever end? No, not till you get into Nebraska, said the men in Boone, Iowa. Put that Maxwell on a flat car and ship it to Omaha. You girls take the train. Oh, well, I was tempted, but no, that would be cheating. I will drive every inch of the way. To lighten the load, the girls took the train ahead and I picked them up in a couple days. A plan we used several more times. Finally, I left all that Iowa gumbo behind, crossed the Missouri River into Nebraska, and slogged through sand most of the way to Wyoming. Whoa, we were finally in the West. Wow. Big sky, mountains, howling coyotes, and driving on rutted wagon trails that ended in the middle of nowhere. We often had to cross cattle ranches, stopping to open the gates, make sure we closed them behind us. One morning in Utah, we had quite a fright when a dozen Indians on horseback rushed up alongside the Maxwell with bows and arrows drawn. Suddenly, a huge jackrabbit jumped out of the brush. Off they all went, as did we, quite relieved. While crossing the Great Salt Lake Desert, I amused myself by watching those cute little prairie dogs. But when the entire front end collapsed through Mr. Prairie Dog's front door, I was not amused. A local rancher helped us wire the entire front end together, and we basically limped along until we came to this enormous gully. Oh, so I slowly and carefully inched the Maxwell down, across, and over to the other side. Then we got the news. You think this is bad? You ought to see the one 6 miles ahead. Well, I knew the disabled Maxwell could go no further. 2 days later, however, with her new axle installed, we were on our way. By Reno, Nevada, I was really homesick for my husband and little boy, but I still had 200 miles and 2 mountain passes to cross. Yet, victory was in sight. And on August 7th, I drove the Maxwell off the ferry into San Francisco. Well, we were greeted with honking horns, cheers, and a parade. What a day. What a journey. I had driven 3,800 miles in 59 days and changed 11 flat tires to become the first woman to drive coast to coast, proving what I know to be true. Good driving has nothing to do with one's sex. It's all above the collar. Happy motoring, everyone.
One of the lost children of the orphan trains, Nettie Crook, was one of thousands shipped west in search of a new family.
Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. I remember sitting on a bench next to my twin sister Nellie at Kansas City's Union Station. We had to sing to impress people interested in adopting orphan train riders. I hated it. It was 1911 when we left the Kingston Orphanage in New York. We were 6 years old. My name is Nettie Crook. My first memory was of Mama leaving for long periods of time and Father away working on the Erie Canal. Our 9-year-old brother Leon took care of us, but we were always hungry, begging the grocer for food. Right before Christmas 1910, Mama hugged Leon, Nellie, and me. Mama, why are you crying? Just then a man from the Justice of the Peace came with official papers. Children, you're to come with me. We were terrified to leave Mama. He took us to the Kingston Orphanage in New York. Boys and girls were kept separate. We sobbed when our brother Leon, they took him away. Thank goodness we had each other. The strict caretakers gave us no affection, and we were always hungry. I can still smell the harsh soap we had to use. The orphanage insisted that we break all ties with the past and changed our birthday to August the 7th, 1905. After 9 months in the orphanage, our lives changed again. I am Miss Hill with the Children's Aid Society. I'm going to take you on a trip. Would you like to ride on a train? She didn't tell us where we were going. I can still hear the train's brakes squealing and the steam belching. The car was filled with children, but our brother Leon wasn't among them. It was cold and pitch black at night. We huddled together to keep warm. At stops along the way, we were put on a platform. Strangers inspected us. Let me see your teeth. Let me feel your muscles. They checked us for bugs and dirt. It frightened me to have strangers touch me. It gave me a tummy ache. What if no one wants me? A boy asked. An agent answered, if you're not chosen at the first stop, there'll be plenty of choices along the way. If no one wants you, you'll go back to the orphanage. What if they beat me? He didn't answer. We began to understand when children left with adults, they were going to new homes. Older boys and babies were chosen first. Older girls were picked last. Nellie and I rode the train for 4 days with our stop in McPherson, Kansas. 11 boys and 7 girls were picked. Nellie and I hoped we would be chosen by a loving family with a warm home and plenty to eat. The Chapins picked us. We'll take them, said Mrs. Chapin. We need help around the house. She reminded me of a mean bulldog with big droopy eyes. Mr. Chapin was kind, and Mrs. Chapin was nice when he was around, but when he left for work, she got mean. She made us eat whatever she put on our plate. Clean your plate. But all that's left is fish bones. Clean every bit of your supper, bones and all. And our chores were tough for 6-year-olds. We had to carry heavy buckets of water that weighed almost as much as we did. And if we made a mistake, punishment was fierce. Once Nellie tripped down the stairs and broke a butter dish. "You clumsy girl, I'll teach you to take better care of my dishes." The buggy whip snapped on her back, leaving nasty welts. I cringed every time I saw that buggy whip. We tried to protect each other, but all we could do is just hug as we fell asleep. Finally, after 16 months, Miss Hill, who accompanied us from New York, came back. We ran into her arms. "Please don't make us stay." She found us a home with James and Mary Darrow, a couple in their 60s. They loved and accepted us. We blossomed. They asked us to call them mother and father. We were excellent students at school, but the children teased us. "Dirty orphans, what's wrong with you if your own mother and father don't want you?" And some parents wouldn't let us play with their children. One asked Mother, "How do you know what kind of blood they come from? You don't know how they'll turn out." Mother snapped back, "And just how do you know how your own will turn out?" She taught us how to cope with the bullying and life lessons such as cooking, cleaning, and sewing. And even after Father Darrow died, we were blessed to have Mother Darrow for 14 of our growing up years. As twins, Nellie and I graduated from Kansas State University with home economics degrees. We both taught high school, then married, and we each had a son and a daughter. Nellie died in 1997. Like so many other orphan train riders, she was ashamed of our growing up years and did not want it brought up. But our families wanted to know wanted our story told as orphan train riders, so I'm beginning to speak up. For 75 years, between 1854 and 1929, approximately 250,000 orphan train children were relocated throughout the United States. Colorado received approximately 1,600. The Children's Aid Society thought it was healthier for the children to be relocated than to live in an orphanage or on the streets. There were sad and hard times for Nellie and me, but there were beautiful and happy times too. Those are the ones I wish to remember. Thank you.
Florence Lawrence, America's first publicized movie star, pioneered in more ways than one. Well, here I am, in front of the famous MGM studios. Am I excited? Because they're doing a special production this afternoon. A documentary to honor those of us who graced the screens before talkies. And I'm in it. Just think, they remember me, Florence Lawrence, the Biograph girl. It's been some years, but many of us actors changed the motion picture system. Well, I was only 3 when Mama put me on stage as Baby Flo. That didn't scare me. I grew up on stage. My mother was Lottie Lawrence, a famous vaudeville actress in Canada who formed her own production company. Acting's a business, and Mother kept it going by movies from town to town
and eventually in 1906 to New York and then New Jersey. I was no longer a baby and ready for more adventurous roles. Competing with my three brothers, I was quite athletic. I took horsemanship along with deportment, and this would pave my way into my first jobs. About this time, Thomas Edison developed the kinetoscope, which allowed people to view small scenes through the top of a device. In fact, it was Thomas Edison who first noticed me when I auditioned for his movie short about Daniel Boone. I was thrilled when he gave me a small part. He saw that I could create many moods with my face and gestures. I could cry on cue. Motion pictures soon evolved onto a bigger screen for larger audiences. Other studios started calling on me to act in their rollicking tales. I galloped on horseback, fell off buildings, and rode down rushing rivers on a log. There were no stunt doubles. In silent entertainment, we relied on action to tell our story. Good actor could make you cry, cheer the hero, boo the villain, gasp in awe at all of the amazing stunts, and of course always rejoice with the heroine. All in the space of 10 or 15 minutes. These were called shorts for a reason. My next move was to Biograph Studios under the direction of D.W. Griffith. His stories were about the life of one person. He called them biographs. I was in over 100 of them and became known as the Biograph Girl. Then he wrote a serial about a Mrs. Jones. So I became Mrs. Jones. Each week that chapter ended in a cliffhanger, and the audience would return on Saturday to see what would happen next. But no one knew my name. Actors were not given credits. Studios feared that this individual recognition would encourage us to ask for more money. When I left Griffith to work at another studio, a vindictive story appeared in the newspapers. They printed, "Biograph Girl dies in automobile crash." Was my career over? My new director, Carl Lemley, had an idea. He arranged for my husband and me to take a trip with a stop in St. Louis, Missouri. When I stepped onto the platform, I was immediately surrounded. There were reporters and photographers everywhere. That did it. They knew I was alive. Pictures were published with my name for the first time. Then the studios started hearing from the fans. This publicity worked better than they expected. Other actors got the same attention. Studios finally figured out they made more money by putting our names on the marquees. I'm glad to have been part of this change and that we all benefit from this recognition. However, this adulation became very overwhelming when people insisted on crowding my every move. It was unnerving. I craved some privacy. Well, I was earning over $500 a week now, so I bought a brand new automobile. I love driving. That 1914 Packard gave me the peace I craved. The freedom, the wind in my hair. No other sound but the purring of my motor. My father built horseless carriages. So I was familiar with the mechanics under the hood. I repaired my own automobile. I loved my Packard, but hit and runs were common. Rules of the road were not enforced. I was determined to avoid these accidents. So after months of study, I developed the mechanical left turn signal and stop signal. I installed these myself. Unfortunately, I did not apply for a patent in time, so I am not credited. But I know I was there. So if you arrived here safely today, you may thank me. As life is known to do, mine took an abrupt left turn with no warning signal. In 1916, I was on the second story of a set when a fire broke out during filming. On fire, I leaped out the window and landed on my back. Badly burned and broken, it took 4 long years of recovery. When I returned, I could get small parts, but talkies had pretty much taken over the industry. There was no longer a place for me. Until today. I'll have you know, the Mr. Louis V. Mayer sent me this invitation to be in his special production. I'm back.
She never thought of herself as a politician, but in 1925, Nellie Taylor Ross made political history.
I solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Wyoming, and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. My name is Nellie Taylor Ross. With that oath, I became the first woman in the United States to be elected and inaugurated as governor. Contrary to my critics' claims, this was not my ambition. It was a necessity. More than 20 years earlier, I had given up my teaching position to marry my sweetheart, William Ross, and we headed west to Wyoming. Will opened his law practice, and I began having babies. I soon joined the Cheyenne Women's Club, where I learned how to give speeches and run meetings. Will was elected governor as a progressive Democrat in 1922. He had great plans to clean up the economic mess and political disaster of the previous decade. Will had only served half his term when he died from appendicitis. The evening of his funeral, I received a visitor, the chairman of the state Democratic Party.
Mrs. Ross, we're real sorry about your husband, but this has put us in quite a predicament. There's going to be a special election next month, and we want you to run for governor. What? We just buried William 3 hours ago. I want you to leave.
Then I began to think about my predicament. Where was I going to live? How was I going to pay my bills? I needed a job. Could I be governor? I certainly understood all of Will's plans and dreams for Wyoming, and I had become quite skilled at conducting meetings and delivering speeches. When I was a teacher, I could control a room full of rowdy 5-year-olds. Surely I could handle those state legislators. So I ran. And in November of 1924, I was elected governor of Wyoming by a margin of 8,000 votes. Still dressed in widow's black, I was inaugurated amid much scrutiny and speculation. People came from all over just to get a look at me. Some of them even camped out on the porch of the governor's mansion. Reporters labeled me as ambitious, not a flattering term for a woman. And there was a pesky photographer who wanted me to pose holding a broom or a rolling pin. And I told him no. This is serious business, and I am here to work for the people of Wyoming. Well, it was not an easy job. And I was so politically naive. Imagine my surprise. Men who had been our family friends for 20 years suddenly became my opponents when the legislature opened. And I quickly learned these men weren't just Democrats and Republicans. They were ranchers, miners, bankers, businessmen, husbands and fathers. Whenever new legislation was introduced, we had to consider its impact on all the citizens of Wyoming. Now, as governor, I was often invited to festivities in Washington, D.C. I even rode in the inaugural parade for Calvin Coolidge. After I delivered the keynote speech to the Democratic Women's Convention, I had a national reputation. Oh, I knew I was walking a fine line as a woman in politics. The men were generally polite to me, but they never accepted me as an equal. I surprised everyone when I fired the Wyoming Game Commissioner and Law Enforcement Commissioner. They were both guilty of public intoxication and unethical behavior. No one could call me a non-assertive woman who avoided conflict. 2 years flew by. The Democrats asked me to run again, and I said, of course, I'm not done yet. I traveled all over the state, giving speeches and meeting people, but I resisted making my gender part of my platform. I didn't think it was relevant. Well, maybe I was wrong. I lost my bid for re-election. Now, by this time, I could earn a living writing magazine articles and giving speeches. I became very active in the National Democratic Party, and I was hired as the director of the Women's Division. Then, 1933, responding to feminist pressure, President Roosevelt appointed me as the first female director of the United States Mint System. I looked forward to using all that I had learned over the past 10 years, even though it meant leaving my beloved Wyoming forever. During my time as director, I oversaw construction of 3 new mint facilities at West Point, Fort Knox, and San Francisco, and my name's engraved into the cornerstone of each one. I considered the mint employees my extended family and liked to travel to all of our sites and see how people were doing. On one trip to the Denver Mint, the supervisor and I were watching as a machine stamped out coins. They fell onto a conveyor belt where they were sorted, collected, and packaged. I watched this, absolutely mesmerized. All of my life I had worried about money, and here it was, actually being made. It was like magic. There were even sparkles in the air. I grabbed the supervisor's arm. I have an idea. I want you to install showers and an incinerator, all with special filters in the bottom. Tell the men at the end of their shift, before they go home, they must take a shower. When their uniforms wear out, don't throw them away. Burn them in that incinerator. Yes, the special filters collected all those sparkles. At the end of the first year of implementation, we had recovered over $100,000 worth of precious metal. Mr. Roosevelt was quite pleased, as were the next two presidents. I held that job for 20 years. Now, one might think that my life is full of contradiction, because I never considered myself a feminist. I always put my family first. However, as my boys grew up, I realized that a woman can and should enter any vocation that she chooses. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve both my state and my country. And now, our final guest was a gutsy physician who treated all kinds of illnesses, including the deadly influenza of 1918. Please welcome Dr. Susan Anderson.
Ma'am, it's Dave. Dave is all torn up from the barbed wire. He's hurt bad. Ma'am, I heard you were a doctor. Please help. Dave is all I got. That's what the young man said to me inside the general store in Fraser, Colorado. I had a dilemma. I didn't want anyone to know I was a doctor yet, not until I was well from the tuberculosis. I needed more time to heal. But my Hippocratic oath gave me no choice. I ran home, picked up my medical bag, and followed the cowboy to a corral. "Where's Dave?" He pointed. "To a horse." It was common for country doctors to treat livestock, but I felt like a fool. Well, no matter, with help, I got that horse untangled and sewn up. After that, folks decided I was a good healer in spite of being a woman. I cured myself, and I saw patients all over Fraser and Middle Park. While I charged 25 cents for a house call, I rarely collected cash, but lots of firewood. 10 years later, in a single day, officials canceled church. They canceled school. They even had to forbid people from attending funerals. In 1918, the worst epidemic ever to hit this planet, Spanish influenza, arrived. No one knew what to do about this horrible disease, let alone this country physician. I'm Susan Anderson, medical doctor. Some folks call me Doc Susie. Denver doctors told me about the Spanish influenza. Some said it started in the trenches in France during the last months of the Great War. Some said it started in the military camps in Fort Riley, Kansas. It was a massive outbreak which began as a nasty cold that either got better in a few days or killed the patient. This flu often skipped the young and elderly, but sucked the life from robust adults in their 20s, including servicemen. While we won the Great War, Spanish influenza was the deadliest battle. I worked day and night, going from house to house. So many needed my help, and if I could not get to them within 12 hours of onset, they often died. Bodies were everywhere, in houses, on roads, dumped in graveyards. I'd never felt so helpless. A doctor said that we didn't know where it came from, and that we knew it was spread by coughs and by simply breathing, especially in crowds. No one knew how to cure it, not even the Surgeon General of the United States. His advice? Avoid wearing tight shoes and gloves. The Spanish flu disappeared as quickly as it came, simply vanished. In 16 months, it killed 40 million people around the world, from the United States to the South Sea Islands. With the invention of the electron microscope 2 decades later, scientists discovered a virus caused the disease. that never came back again. Now, I saw many ways to prevent other diseases. I was often called to lumber camps to treat a malady, and while there, I gathered women and children for physical exams and administered smallpox and diphtheria vaccinations. Then I inspected the area, spotting poor health practices. Move that privy away from the creek. We don't want a typhoid epidemic here. Any good doctor knows an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I kept my medical bag stocked with standard supplies, including bundles of dressings that I boiled and ironed to kill bacteria, a dental kit, and surgical tools. On a typical day, I might stitch a laceration, pull a tooth, and deliver a baby on the kitchen floor. When I could, I traveled by train to Colorado General Hospital in Denver for supplies and caught up on medical advances with university physicians. They knew I worked under primitive conditions without a laboratory or x-ray machine. I'm proud to say those Denver doctors considered me the best diagnostician on the western slope. However, it did not take a doctor to diagnose drunkenness. Banning booze would make my job easier. Many medical problems stem from alcohol abuse, seizures, beatings, gunshot wounds. Drinking alcohol ruined lives. I used it for one reason, to help my patients get through surgery. Since I never stocked narcotics, I told many a wife, go ahead and give a little whiskey for the pain. So I was thrilled when Prohibition finally passed in 1920. Colorado had been dry for 4 years already, but most folks figured out how to get around it. One way was Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, made from herbs and 20% alcohol. Advertisers claimed, cures all women's ills, including a craving for alcohol. I told my patients, throw it out. It's mostly liquor. And I don't think any of them heeded my advice. And local folks everywhere brewed their own hooch. I asked Sheriff Fletcher why he couldn't stop them. He said, if I arrested every moonshiner, all the men in Grand County would be in jail, including county officials and state legislators. Then who would vote for me? Fraser Valley became prime moonshine territory for Denver's crime bosses looking to make a profit. Everyone knew I hated those bootleggers, so the sheriff deputized me and included me on many raids. I'd grab my medical bag, my hat, and my axe. Join up with the deputies and treasury men in the forest. The sheriff would yell, you are all under arrest. And then I'd start. I love smashing those stills. White lightning flew out of those barrels. Prohibition was an exciting time for me. I may have been a little eccentric since I never threw anything away. My house was full. But I created narrow paths through stacks of books, catalogs, and newspapers. Eventually, I had little space for patients. No room for food. So I often dropped in at mealtime at people's homes whenever I felt like it. I did not eat much, and I liked to visit. Besides, it was a good way to collect on some bills. I heard Charlie Warner bagged himself an elk. Hot elk stew tonight. Thank you. We have Nettie Crook. Nellie Taylor Ross. Alice Ramsey. Florence Lawrence. Dr. Susan Anderson. These women and countless others like them blaze the trail toward the freedom of individuality that women enjoy today. We salute their courage.